Hi, welcome to the DevGraph Tech Talk series. I'm your host, Darren. In this episode, we're going to talk about migrating from Engine Yard Cloud to Engine Yard Containers. And this is really not a typical upgrade. It's really a paradigm shift if you think about it, because we're moving from virtual machines as the underlying compute capacity to containers. And that is really a game changer. You're going to get better scalability, resource utilization, all of that with the same push button deployments. Now, as we talk about DevOps and NoOps, let's dig into that just a little bit. So today you're writing recipes, other DevOps scripts to get your applications deployed. As we move to Engine Yard Containers, we're really getting into the NoOps philosophy. Your organization already spends enough time working on deployments, scripting for that support, and Engine Yard Cloud provides you hardened images and support and the mechanisms to make that happen. When you switch to Engine Yard Containers, a lot of that work is already going to be done for you by the platform. You literally can focus on building your application and doing push button deployments to a really scalable underlying technology, and that is the container. You're going to define what you want your target environment to look like, and we're going to package up that for you, deploy it, and monitor and scale it for you. So this is really a migration. There's a strong case to look at doing this as soon as you can. It's really going to help your infrastructure. We're going to talk in this video about everything that's involved in making that switch. So let's dig into it. So let's compare the two platforms for a moment. Engine Yard Cloud uses virtual machines. So you provisioned a VM. We gave you a hardened image on which you installed your Ruby on Rails application, Node, or PHP. Engine Yard Containers has a bit more flexibility. You can define your container image and use any language that you want to use, or also specify the runtime dependencies that you need. So it's separated from the underlying platform itself. Let's look in more detail at what that means. On EYC, you install your application components on the VMs that are provisioned. So in this example, there are two application components, the web app, which takes customer orders, and then an asynchronous process that does fulfillment. So you would install that on VM1 and VM2. The implications of this design are that your application does have some dependencies on the platform. And of course, that goes through upgrades, for example, security patches. And then finally, scalability. Your application starts to get more traffic. You may need to provision additional VMs. Contrast that with Engine Yard Containers. This is a more flexible model. So each container is like a Linux process. It starts up very quickly, it's much more lightweight, and we're able to flexibly scale that. So let's dive into that in more detail. You see the cluster here first. This is in a chosen geographic region, and it's going to run within its own virtual private cloud. Within that, you can have multiple applications or sets of containers. Now, how do we address those issues that we identified before? Well, the application is based on a container image, which you can use a Docker file to define. That's going to have the specification of all of your runtime dependencies independent of the underlying platform that it runs on. So security patches can be applied to that, separate from your application because the container image defines your runtime. You can also turn on auto-scaling by process type. So in this example, the web application is getting a higher utilization, so the platform can automatically scale up to here 5 container instances for the web app, and keep the asynchronous task at 2. The platform handles all of this for you. Now, how do you move from Engine Yard Cloud to Engine Yard Containers? The first step would be to take an application inventory. So what are all of the software components and infrastructure elements that make up your application? Typically, this might include web servers, application servers, databases, and scheduled jobs. Now, for each of these, you can plan how they will be migrated. Fortunately, we've done a lot of the heavy lifting for you. We do have playbooks with repeatable processes for most common component types. And then finally, you're going to test and deploy your changes. Now, let's take a look at migrating compute. So we talked about the different dependencies that your application may have. As an example, let's consider a NodeJS application. Your Docker file is going to specify the installation of NodeJS. That's a runtime dependency that you have. The proc file is going to specify that you want that server or that process type to be run. So each proc file entry is a process type, and it specifies the command to run that component. This design is then perfect for a service-based architecture or microservices. You can specify entries in the proc file for each of your services, and the platform will scale those individually as needed. Keep in mind that one application corresponds to a single Git project. So at the root level of the project, you'll have your Docker file that specifies your application dependencies, and you'll also have your proc file. Now we also have an initialization utility that's going to help you generate that Docker file, and we're always happy to work with you to complete your migrations. With regards to databases and persistence mechanisms, we recommend that you migrate your compute capacity first. This keeps things simple, and then as a second step, you can also migrate your databases and storage. We're going to discuss the topic of persistence in more detail in a future video. But for now, I wanted to mention that you can use EYK to provision and integrate AWS persistence mechanisms that are shown here. And these are going to be provisioned within your account. They're your resources. And the nice thing is they're securely connected to your cluster and applications within your VPC. All of the traffic stays within that VPC and is completely secure. So that's an overview of how you can migrate from Engine Yard Cloud to Engine Yard Containers. We really do believe that this second generation platform is going to simplify your deployment and your operations. We really encourage you to check it out now at engineyard.com. So that's it for this Tech Talk. I'm your host, Darren. We'll catch you next time on the DevGraph Tech Talk series.